Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, China announces a range of measures to support the country's three-child policy. Can they shift the falling birth rate? The Biden administration proposes a $750 million arms sale to Taiwan as U.S.-China tensions continue. How will this impact current relations? And this week's newsmaker. Now, on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Xu Qinduo. The city of Beijing has offered an extra 30 days of maternity leave to mothers with a third child from the end of May. Mothers in Beijing were already entitled to 3 to 4 months of maternity leave as the basic standards. Another Chinese city earlier announced the subsidies of 500 yuan a month for each second or third child until the child turns 3. So these are some of the follow-up measures to encourage young couples to have more children after China introduced a three-child policy this year to raise the fertility rate. So how is the policy being promoted and how effective will it be in terms of dealing with China's demographic challenges? To find out, I'm joined by Anna Tangen, independent current affairs commentator, He Jin, attorney at GEN law firm, and Joanna Lei, managing director of Azure Management in Taipei. So Joanna, I will start with you. And if you look at the policy introduced by the city of Beijing, in addition to the 30 days extra leave, also they say, the mother can also enjoy an additional like 1 to 3 month of leave if their workplace agrees. The father also enjoys 15 days off. Does that sound, incentive? Does that sound like strong enough for you? Okay, I will reconsider my decision probably to have another child.
Well, it's certainly a major improvement over what it was before. But as someone who's gone through the U.S. trying to get working mother to have another child in the 1980s and 90s, and Taiwan trying to increase its birth rate from 1990s to 2010, I think there are a couple of issues to discuss. Some of these measures, while it may look very beneficial to childbearing age women, it could result in a reverse discrimination. In different countries, you see women in that age sometimes, while they're not allowed to ask whether they will bear another child, the fact that they have a very long maternity leave sometimes may be an employer's consideration. So I think it's important to overall think about the child birth rate as a holistic problem. It should not be addressed just from the childbearing women perspective alone. Sometimes it needs to be a gender equal perspective. For example, in Taiwan now, men can also have the childbearing holidays at home or work leave at home so that you equalize the differences between genders. And in other places, they measure in addition to demographically related measures, they would try to fortify family, allowing the extended family to share the responsibility and burden, both economic and otherwise, in terms of child rearing and parenting. So looking at just the childbearing age women will not resolve this issue. It really needs to have an overall holistic approach for any society to deal with the aging society problem.
Mm-hmm. Good point. We'll come back to this holistic approach. He Jin, Beijing is one of the 3, let's say, provincial level places in China to introduce new policies, specific policy to support this third child policy. Like in Panzhihua, in southwestern part of China, they introduced the idea like 500 yuan to each second and third child until they turn 3. How effective that will be?
It could be helpful, right? I think whatever the extra resources the government is willing to give the couples, give the family, will be helpful. But like Joanna said, the holistic approach is very crucial. I think the 2 probably bigger things are really in the way. China's Social Security law provides general the child birth insurance program, but I think it's going to be getting very rigorous. We saw some of the local governments now starting really I think 2.0 version type of implementation, the employer got to put like 1% of the total the salary of the company as a part of the insurance fees. At the same time, like Joanna said, you cannot put all the burden on the employer. I think I saw some of the proposed idea is that the national governments are putting together this childbirth big foundation or fund, probably at the local level as well, to be implemented. They are going to subsidize or compensate some of the funds that an employer contribute to taking care of the mothers.
Mm-hmm. Well, Anna, there is issue of also, involving not only the government, the couples, but also usually the firms they work for example, the additional month of leave in the policy of Beijing, they say, if your workplace agrees, then you can have an additional leave 1 to 3 months. If they don't, and then probably you will not enjoy the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to have to be rules. Right now, across China, there are different rules depending on the national plus local. Employers are going to be very loath to give it up. I think there has to be more creativity. I agree with Joanna. Maybe having 3.5-day work weeks, having job sharing, so that mothers can do that, and perhaps offering the same to their husbands, so that one can be on duty while the other one is working. There are more creative solutions that can be brought to bear. But Beijing has put together a package, tax advantages, etc. But they're going to have to also look at physical realities. The average urban house is 60 square meters. I can't imagine 2 parents, 3 kids, and probably 1 or 2 grandparents living in 60 square meters. So there will have to be some attempt to make sure that there's housing that is appropriate for people, and that would probably have to be around 100, 120 square meters. That would represent a big change to the kind of housing patterns that you currently have.
Well, obviously that's a comprehensive, approach involving different sectors like housing, education, childbearing, etc. That's probably why the authorities say they will establish a support system to the third child policy by 2025. Still, we have like 3 to 4 years to go. So Joanna, if you look at this low birth rate, not only in the mainland, in Taiwan, in countries in this region, for example, Japan, South Korea, more or less, we all suffer a similar problem, even worldwide, European countries, the U.S. For example, some young women would say, I have my career and I'm economically independent. I want to be alone or even get married but without child. How can you change people's, this is a lifestyle or mentality from, previously agrarian society to industrial or post-industrial society. The mindset is different.
Well, you're absolutely correct. The low birth rate is not just an individual problem confronting one society. Right now, Taiwan's birth rate is extremely low. And even advanced societies like Japan and Italy, their birth rate is at 1.3 per woman. So it's really low as well. So it is important for us to rethink about our social structure. I'd like to bring 3 things to the discussion. One is you do need to have flexible work relations for that woman who is concerned about her own independence. She must have some reassurance that she would have opportunities for job sharing or re-entry into the workforce after she's done her duty in bearing her child and bringing the children to a certain age. So re-entry into the workforce now is extremely low and very difficult for women everywhere. The second thing is cost of education. I think this is extremely important in mainland China. The cost in urban centers for even nursery, preschools are exorbitant for any simple white-collar working women families to even comprehend. So the cost of education has to be honed in to bring to a level of manageability. The third one, I think we should all take a look at what Singapore did. Singapore has a holistic approach. When they try to encourage filial piety, they allow families living with their parents priorities in choosing bigger HDB flats closer to the urban centers. So that kind of approach allow the families their flexibilities. If they choose to live with their parents, they will have high priority to get more desirable housing. And those kind of approaches can be really, really good case in point for other societies.
Mm-hmm. Well, Hejing, obviously, in terms of reducing the cost of education, you can see the government is working on that by basically having a tighter policy on this extra curriculum training, for example, classes in Beijing, in Shanghai, or basically nationwide.
Yeah, I think that's probably the first step of the overall plan. I think I saw some stats in China. I think at least for the 4 major cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, the average cost of raising a child before the college would be around 350 US dollars or 2 million RMB equally. So it's a huge. I think the government has to really figure out something more to really helping out the families. And one thing I actually want to follow up on what Joanna said. I'm an employer myself, right? I'm taking care of a team of like 80 people. I just had a conversation with one of my employees, very, very capable, one of our best, patent attorney in our group. She's going to have a baby in 1 month. We just have a conversation. I was so surprised that she actually was really concerned that she may be given some kind of less important project at work simply because she's pregnant, or even after she's back to work. And probably people want to take a look after her, feel like she has to spend more time with kids. She's really worried about that, how this is going to affect her career path. I was very surprised, to be honest. We always thought we tried to take very good care of her, but on her side, that she has this big sense of insecurity. So this is something at a firm level, at an employer level, we have to do a much more. And of course, the employer, we hope that the government will consider some kind of a way to taking care of employers.
Let's hope the government is listening to our show and get all the important information. We'll move on. In the U.S., the Biden administration has informed Congress of a proposed $750 million weapon sale to Taiwan, which has been strongly criticized by the China's foreign ministry. With the relationship of China and the U.S. at a low point, this move is likely to further inflame tensions between Washington and Beijing. So what is the attitudes of the Biden administration over Taiwan, and how will this sale affect stability across the strait? Anna, obviously, if you look at this situation between Beijing and Washington, we say the weapon sale itself is not really surprising because it has been there basically with every administration in Washington. But what's probably different is like now the relationship between China and the U.S. is at a low point.
Absolutely, and this is kind of a day-by-day thing. There's all these announcements about economic actions, military actions, literally on a daily basis coming from the Biden administration, and you're seeing a pile-on effect. Great Britain is sending ships into their all these countries. Even Germany is thinking about sending a frigate into the Indo-Pacific, which is actually the South China Seas. So you're seeing on a kind of hysteria that's going on, and it's very, very dangerous. Now, the specific type of weapon they're doing is a howitzer. It's a 155 millimeter howitzer. It's mainly defensive. It's 30 to 40 miles in terms of range, although they're trying to increase that. And the 40 miles requires very expensive rocket-aided munitions, which are a couple, to 15,000 a pop. So it's just, why is this the appropriate time when there's such high tensions to be announcing this? And it's just not clear. It just seems like every day, there is something where U.S. says, oh, we want a rules-based international order, we want calm, we want things, and then on the other hand, oh, we're selling weapons to Taiwan.
Well, Joanna, sitting in Taipei is really about the Washington's policy toward China. Taiwan issue is one part of that, the key part of the overall policy. So what do you see as Biden's policy toward Taiwan? How is it different from that of Trump?
I think these are not just differences between Trump and Biden. Since 2020, there is a new doctrine, if you will, that the overall defense concept has changed in terms of Taiwan's military defense. Since 1979 or 80, there were a long-standing doctrine that says we'd like to have, if there were any warfare, to be as far away from the shores of Taiwan as possible. But now the new overall defense concept, which by the way, you can easily track in ODC, starting from 2020, it has two basic assumptions. One, mainland China may have full-scale warfare on Taiwan because of the unification, and two, Taiwan will never deal with this in the first strike basis. It will have to have a second or third military preservation capabilities. So following this, you can see a whole new slew of new kinds of acquisitions. In the past, the procurements would be about platforms like F-16s or the frigates. These are major platforms, major few conventional capabilities building weapons. Right now, there are three major directions. One is defense or force preservation, to allow the force to withstand the first strike. The second is some traditional conventional capabilities, but thirdly, the most important new direction is asymmetrical capabilities. So these 750 million US, even though it has not passed the Congress, but has already been submitted by the Defense Security Cooperation Agency to Congress, and as US media has reported that they've received pre-approval, will be a major step towards the asymmetrical capabilities built for joint operation between US and Taiwan. So force building is one. The second is concept of operation in this new overall defense concept. And that overall concept has a lot of US involvement, almost like in the past when I was a child, that the MAAG, Military Assistance Advisory Group, was still operating in Taiwan. There were a lot of joint operation, joint training in the future to come.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at the survey, most of the people in Taiwan would prefer the status quo, no hurry for reunification, but certainly no appetite for independence, because that means a lot. And in the worst scenario, we say, unfortunately, people will talk about military conflict or war, but are people really confident that, with the purchase of, military hardware, somehow Taiwan is capable of defending itself?
Well, most people actually have no say in this. We all understand that whether Taiwan is in a peace and stable situation has a lot to do with the cross-strait relations. But the current Taiwan government and the DPP doctrine does not allow people to really express their opinions in terms of wanting to maintain a peace and stable status quo. So unfortunately, even this overall defense concept, the new one starting from last year, roughly around August, was embraced, endorsed, and welcomed by Tsai Ing-wen personally. So I'm pessimistic in terms of people's ability to voice their opinions in this matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, He Jing, if you look at this U.S. Arms sale to Taiwan previously, there's this landing of the military aircrafts, and also with U.S. Officials, Congress people. These actions are seen as the U.S. approach like a salami slicing. They are touching this bottom line, but not directly challenging the bottom line. But obviously, despite this insistence, like the U.S. follow the one China principle, but in essence, it's being hollowed out more or less.
Yes. I think the Biden administration is probably continuing what the American side has been doing for 4 decades. They've been hiding behind the door. They've been hiding behind this quote-unquote the Taiwan Relations Act, which was passed nearly 40 years ago. Even though the whole world changed so much, right? The whole geopolitical situation completely shifted. But I think American side is keeping trying to making the act as an excuse to keep selling the arms or engaging with Taiwan through different ways. But I think that's really increased the risk of the high risk of the entire situation. U.S. is no longer in some kind of third-party role to ensure the peace. the more they're doing this, actually really make the game more dangerous.
Well, Anna, this Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, said recently, said if China takes Taiwan, it's all over. U.S. has to take strong actions. So obviously Taiwan is part of this U.S. strategic competition with China. So it's more like a card against China.
Well, yes, Nikki Haley is not in power right now, although she will be probably running at some point in the future for president. She thinks she has a long road ahead of her. But what she says in order to gain attention for herself is not in the strategic best interest of the U.S. However, there is this growing feeling that egging China on into some sort of action against Taiwan would be a massive public relations coup for the U.S., because they could then turn around and say, look, China is the aggressor, it has taken over Taiwan, you must follow our lead. So it's very important to realize the U.S. is still trying to push China's buttons, especially on issues as sensitive as this.
Well, of course, we say Taiwan is a dangerous issue here, but for people who are not exactly following this issue, probably they have a less understanding of how critical or how important this issue to China, to the Chinese people in Taiwan is.
Okay, this is not an issue of policy. This is in the Constitution. There is one China. Taiwan is part of China. That's saying to an American, look, we're going to carve off Texas and take it away. That it's just not going to happen, and people have to understand just what a serious red line this is and how dangerous it is for the United States and Taiwan to be dancing on, as you said, salami slicing or dancing on tightropes with something where something could go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's leave it there for now and take a look at this week's Newsmaker. So a new study was carried out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which detected coronavirus antibodies in wild deer populations in 4 states in the U.S. To find out what's the significance of this, we are joined by Dr. Zhu Chen, Associate Professor at the State Key Laboratory of Emerging Infectious Disease of the University of Hong Kong. So Professor Zhu, are you surprised to hear the news that the virus somehow was detected in the wild animals?
Me too. I'm also feeling quite surprised about this news.
Yeah, I mean, how previously we heard of that, for the farmed animals, because of their close contact with a human being, obviously it's easy for them to get infected. But wild animals, what's the danger of wild animals catching this virus? People will think about the mutation, whether they're somehow, beyond our control.
Yes, I think that in the U.S., because that the white-tailed deer are actually quite abundant and also in close association with the human population, especially in the eastern U.S. So actually, when they have the exposure to the infected humans or the human population, they may get infected as well, because the in silico analysis shows that deer has the receptor that is quite susceptible to the SARS coronavirus 2. And also in the laboratory, people has already proved that deer, they are quite susceptible to the virus. They can get infected. They can even transmit the virus among the deer population. Yes. So I think that the major concern for the virus spill over back to the wild animals may include several aspects. Firstly, the virus may be, if the virus may be maintained and spread among the new host, then they will have a chance to adapt and evolve into a new species. So that may pose a new threat to the human population. And secondly, when the virus have the chance to further transmit it to the other animal species or the host, co-infection or recombination or even gene exchanges with the other animal coronavirus may occur, and making the situation more complicated and more unpredictable. So I think this kind of situation has actually occurred in the influenza outbreaks for several times in the future. For example, the swine influenza outbreaks. So we know that when the human H1N1, H3N2 gets into the pig population and then become established a new lineage, then the virus may have a lot of chances to exchange the genes with the swine virus. And after that, when they get back to the human beings with an altered pathogenicity, transmissibility, and even escape from the current human vaccine, then they will become a big problem to our human population.
With the latest development, what should we do? I mean, to say cut off or to limit the potential transmission or infectious, being infectious to other animals or even to human beings again, in particular to other parts of the world, not only the U.S., but say China, what do we need to do?
I think that the most important thing at this moment is that surveillance and very close monitoring of the virus in the other animal species as well, because we know that actually coronavirus is a virus family that has a broad host range, and also many animal species has already been found to be potentially susceptible to the SARS coronavirus too, either based on the in silico analysis or the animal infection experiments in the laboratory. So I think that we have to have the virus surveillance, and try to figure out whether any kind of animals has already got the infection. So this kind of serological study or the direct virus detection can help us to identify the risk for the virus infection in the wild. Yes.
So Anna, obviously, with the latest discovery, probably is add actual urgency for countries and regions to speed up your vaccination campaign, and also to try our best to cut off the continuous transmission of the disease.
Yeah, you would think so, but I mean, right now, even with what's happening in the United States and other nations, you're still having people who are vaccine hesitant or not hesitant, they're vaccine adverse. And this is a terrible situation, because it just means that there's going to continue rebreeding. You're not going to get to the 85% where you can effectively knock this out. So at this point, the best way of dealing with this is the monitoring, but first vaccines for everybody. And until that happens, it's not just the animals that are putting us at threat, it's the new variants that will be coming on. There's Lambda already, there are more to come, because people have not been willing to do the work necessary to stamp it out in the first place.
Well, Professor Zhu, if you briefly, in terms of this virus, and how much do we know, and give us some prediction. How long do we need to contain this virus?
You mean the SARS virus in the human population?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that because this virus has now become a pandemic outbreak all over the world, if all the countries can coordinate to have the very strict virus control measures, then I think the chances to completely remove this virus still exist. For example, in China, time and time again, we see outbreaks here and there, but each time we control them successfully. But the problem is that whether we really can talk to each other, coordinate with each other, and everybody obey the guidelines from the experts.
We need more cooperation. Thank you, Professor Zhu.
Yes.
With that, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks again to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for watching. See you next time.